Hey everyone, and thank you for listening to this episode of the Book It or Release podcast. Our special guest this week has been one of the most successful audio engineers to work in New York City. His career spans over 30 years and is still going strong. His professional history includes working at some of the most iconic audio studios in New York, from Soundtrack to Eastside Audio, Lower East Side to Photomag, Audio Engine, and is currently the engineer and owner of AE Media. Our guest this week is Bob Giammarco. Bob, thank you so much for doing the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Anytime anybody's interested in something I have to say, I'm happy to talk, unfortunately.
And full disclosure, Ray actually worked for you for quite some time. So there's a bit of history between you guys.
Well, Ray and I were co-workers at Eastside, and then he came to work for me at AE Media before we got the rug pulled out of us, out from under us in New York. But yeah, that's Ray and I go way back.
Yeah, we definitely do. We definitely have a history. It's one of the best introductions that I had early on in my career when I met Bob while I was in between national and jumping around a couple of things. I met Bob at East Side because I worked for Post Perfect, which it was part of East Side and Lower East Side at the time.
Gordon Media Companies.
Yeah, pretty much. That's
Gordon Media.
So we developed a friendship late in the business as we reconnected by coincidence because we had I started to work for Wild Child Editorial. And through the conversations while I started at Wild Child, the first thing that came up was AE Media. And once AE Media, before it was known as Audio Engine. And they told me Bob Giammarco was running that audio room. And I was ecstatic. I was like, wow. So we reconnected and we reintroduced ourselves after being apart for so long.
That sounds familiar.
And Bob welcomed me with open arms, gave me advice. We spoke like adults. It was a totally different reintroduction, which my personal view was the best thing that ever happened. He's a great father. I see him, what he does, and is a staple of what I want to be, and he's one of the most honest. He's one of the most direct guys that you should get advice from if you want to do anything in the business. He would tell you straight up, and he's done it for me. He trusted me with his company while he was in Arizona and I was in New York, even though he was always hands-on. But he gave me the trust that more people should give in certain aspects of the business. And we did that. So with that, I think we open up that conversation to where Chris leads it to right now.
So yeah, Bob, I'm always interested in hearing this story from people in our business. Is like, how did you get into it? What was your first job? What did you have to do to get in this industry?
Well, I started in audio, and I mean, for my age range, it's pretty much the same thing. I was a musician. When I was a musician and a kid, when I was a teenager, or even in my early 20s, we didn't have anything we have now. There was no GarageBand. There was no Pro Tools on your laptop. There was nothing. As a matter of fact, I don't know if this is a great little side story, but it's along the same kind of thinking. If you guys have watched the Paul McCartney 3-2-1 special on Hulu, it's fantastic. And he talks about when they first started writing songs, he's like, we wrote songs that were memorable, but not because we were trying to write songs that were memorable. They had to be memorable, otherwise we lost them. So if I'd wait, because there was no recording devices, not even back then, because now you're talking about the early 60s. They didn't even have a little portable cassette recorder to record stuff. So they had to make sure what they were doing was memorable. So for me, I got to the point where most musicians do at that point in their life. It's like, hey, we think we're good. we were terrible, but that's besides the point. And it's time to go into the studio and record ourselves. And I still have those recordings to remind me of how fucking terrible I can be. If when you put your mind to it, you can be bad, really bad if you work hard at it. But basically, you know, one of the first times in the studio, I was kind of bitten. I was like, yeah, man, I love this. At that point in time, I still wanted to be a rock star or whatever, but the studio really, really intrigued me. And I started doing, you know, just more work for my bands, for friends' bands, and then I started working in a small like demo studio, cutting band demos and stuff like that. And I had worked for Rob Kavicchio at Soundtrack, who, you know, it's funny. I'm gonna be blunt about this. It's probably nothing that he's probably not ever heard me say it in a very, very long time, but he's heard me say it. So, you know, at a point in time when I worked for Rob, it's like, man, I wanted to kill that guy. He was just, yeah, he was a tough guy to work for. Until I had my own business. And the moment I had my own business, 95% of the things that I thought he was crazy for, he wasn't. He was actually just doing what an owner does to keep their business up and running, and dealing with a bunch of temperamental creatives that think they know everything about everything. And I don't care how much that costs. I want it. Not thinking about what the ROI is going to be on that, not thinking about whether it's ever going to get used, or, you know, any of those kinds of things. So when I worked, I did a lot of music work in the beginning of my career, and I'm sort of jumping around a little bit. Basically, I got after I was doing band demos in a smaller studio, I realized I'm going to need to go to a bigger facility, even if I have to take a step back and become an assistant again. I need to, because I'm not getting exposed to the right people. You know, kids from, with all due respect, kids from garage bands in Brooklyn probably weren't going to make my career. They weren't going to become the next whatever. So I went everywhere trying to get a job, and as an assistant at probably around 23, and got turned down by like almost everybody, because they were like, no, we give this job to 19-year-olds. You're gonna, you know, you're gonna have to run and get coffee and, you know, clean the toilet and all that kind of stuff, and you're gonna get bored with that, you know. And I'm like, no, actually, I'm not. You know, I realized that I pay some dues, but it was really difficult to get someone to hire me. Steve Hasday and Mitch and Ira Uspe at M&I were the people that finally did hire me. And they were, you know, probably the first significant mentors in my career. They were a jingle demo studio. Once again, this is before the notion of having your own studio, even at a relatively professional level, before it even existed. You know, at that point in time, the composers at the music house basically took a little portable cassette recorder, sit it on front of put it on top of the piano, played their demo, sang it, played it, boom, and that was it. And then it was given to an arranger, and we would take it to the studio, and we would record a proper demo. And, you know, basically the classic story that's always handed down to you as a recording engineer, and probably lots of other of similar types of positions, an editor or colorist. One day, the chief engineer is not going to want to do the gig, and you'll be up. Do a good job. So that's exactly what happened to me. The client had a gig. The client was Looking Company, which was a big music house in New York at the time. They had a gig that had to get done on the weekend, and our, you know, senior engineer didn't want to do it. So they're like, well, Bob will do it.
So what are you recording on at this point? Like, what's your setup?
Gear. Oh, well, the M&I was a Trident desk and an MTR 90 classic 24 track setup, all outboard gear.
Yeah.
Still joke around. We laugh, back at that point in time, and most guys that are doing this, my former partner Tom Goldblatt and lots of other guys that are basically our age were like, yeah, remember we could align a 24 track machine in like 10 minutes. And now it'd probably take me the better part of the day. Going, what do I do now?
Now the 24 track, that was a 2-inch.
Yeah, 2-inch 24 track.
Okay, yeah, 'cause I my first job getting into this into the business was working at the Edison,
Okay,
with
sure.
with Gary
Gary
Chester.
Chester. Yeah, I
Yeah,
did a
and
lot of jobs. I worked there a lot as a freelancer because that's very funny. 6 degrees of separation. So, Looking Company, they were a big client of the Edison, and Gary Chester was a well-known guy that we used to use for the final records many times, and sort of the same way, because I was their demo guy. I wound up going to a lot of final sessions and working with guys like Gary Chester and Ben Wish and Larry Alexander, and a lot of really big time senior guys that I got to watch work up close, and Mike DeLug, a whole bunch of people, and those were, I mean, to me, that was the best part of the gig, because you got to watch the guys that really know how to do it. We used to use Josh Abbey, super talented mixer and engineer, for a lot of different stuff. And I remember as an assistant, I was the house engineer then at Looking Company, because we had started to build our own studio. And then I would assist when the other guys would come in. And I remember giving Josh like something I had worked on that I thought was like so amazing, and I was like, "Oh, dude, you want to check this out?" And he gave me great perspective on. He's like, "Look, it's good. It's just good." He goes, "But in our role, you got to remember, these were not all your calls, so you can only do so much. I mean, technically I have to make sure things are clean and, all of that kind of stuff. But at a certain amount of time, at a certain time, I can't rewrite a part and say, hey, that doesn't work. It's like, yeah, that's what the arranger wanted. That's what the composer wanted. I have no choice. You're limited to a certain degree with what you've got going. So it was important to get that perspective, because I used to sweat every detail. I'm sure Rich Look and Mark Blatt even remember this. That first gig I did on the weekend that the senior engineer wouldn't want to do, I was so disappointed with myself when it was done. I stayed hours after they left and like did a whole other mix. And I was like, I don't like what I did. I want you to listen to this. And they're just like, relax, calm down.
Right.
It's fine. You did fine. Now I know better, because I'm experienced, quite frankly, on both sides of the ball as a producer and an engineer and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, of course, they're like, we wouldn't have left if we didn't already have what we wanted. But if you didn't like it and wanted to show us what you could do, cool, that's fine. You could do it. But so it was just that constant evolution of learning and honing your craft, watching other people, and then the other sort of big significant. So M&I was a big benchmark in my career. Actually, prior to that too, there was really a very, very good friend of mine, Gene Moore, who I was in a lot of bands with. He's a super talented musician, and he was a very demanding guy to work for. And he would, like, I know for a fact he'd be like cringing listening to this, but a very demanding guy to play with, because he was so freaking talented. And one day he just said to me, he goes like, dude, he goes, like, what do you want to do? Because like when you're on the other side of the glass, like, you're amazing. On this side of the glass, yeah, you're good, but not great. And that that gave me a big push to do that way. And then through the course of doing music recording, I found myself in and out of Soundtrack a lot, which is a studio we used to work at a lot. And it was Rob Cavicchio that convinced me to move into post. And he was like, look, you've got the technical chops, which back then you really needed them. This is long before non-linear editing. So we're locking, machines up with SMPTE and all that,
Oof.
kind of stuff.
Oof.
So he goes, you got the technical chops to pull this off. He goes, and you have the personality that ad clients will respond to. I think you'll do well. And he started putting me on advertising gigs, post mixing. And that went very well. And unfortunately for him, and quite frankly, back then, a little short-sighted on my part to sort of cut bait and run so quickly there. What started to happen was a number of people that I had worked for that were doing, once again, this is still at a point in time where there's a very, very clear line on every project between demo and final. Demo, final. Demo music, final music. Demo rough mix, final mix for air. It was still all happening in studios. Now that whole demo phase is gone. We lost all that business. That doesn't happen anymore. So the demo work that I was doing at Soundtrack, sooner or later, I was hearing from editors like, we like working with you, but our clients want to work at East Side or the Mix place. They want to work at name, post places.
Right.
That was the advent. That coincided with the advent of non-linear editing and mixing. So I was an SSL artist, SSL endorser artist, and I picked up, and Rob was a big customer of SSL and bought the first screen sound, which was so primitive by today's standards, but the first screen sound in the United States would literally had serial number 1, and I buried myself in it. And because I did, I wound up being recruited by Eastside and also by Pacific Ocean Post. Being incredibly young and stupid, I turned down Pacific Ocean Post out of hand because they were in California. And I have a funny story about that. So I wound up taking the gig at Eastside, which really launched my post career.
So what year is this roughly?
This is 1990.
Okay.
The POP, funny sidebar to the POP thing. So I want to say somewhere in the early 90s, maybe 92 or 93, a group of us from Eastside wound up going to LA for AES. And Jackie Sparks, who was the studio manager of Eastside at the time, had worked at LA studios. She was connected to the California scene. So she basically knew everybody and took us on a tour. And I remember the very first time that I went to POP, it's right on the fucking beach in Santa Monica. It's just like mind-blowingly beautiful. And I'm like, oh my God, I should have at least come out here and checked the place out.
What did I do?
But you know what? I still, to this, I mean, I don't know what my life would have looked like then. So what difference does it make? But it was a very, very, it did teach me a lesson about not necessarily dismissing an opportunity out of hand until you fully vetted it. And yeah, you know what? At that point in time, I had been recently married and picking up and moving to California probably wasn't a super realistic, thing to consider. But I should have at least known what I was dismissing out of hand.
Right, exactly.
And then, Eastside, the 90s at Eastside were really the glory days of audio post because it wasn't everywhere. Very few people could do it themselves because the technological barrier was insane. I mean, this is back in the day where you're talking about, over $1 million to build a room, a 56 or 74 input SSL desk alone is, in the $600,000-$700,000 range. So
incredible.
Yeah. So you're just talking, the barrier to entry back then was insane, which was why we worked insane hours. It's hard to believe that utilization still to this date, even at any of my companies, whether it was the Audio Engine brand or the AE Media brand, even when we were riding at our highest peak, we never had utilization like Eastside did. Eastside was most often booked every day, all day, every room. 5 rooms, 9 to 6 every day.
Oh my God.
And then guys like Tom Goldblatt, Tom Chuckarone, and myself, we were working overtime as well. We were working all day and then doing a night session because just for availability, because you couldn't get it. When I first moved to Arizona in 2002, I made a mistake a lot of people did. I took way too much shit with me. And when I started to consolidate it down, go, why did I move this 2,500 miles across country? That was stupid. I found my old paper diaries where I used to keep track of my sessions because we were paid on commission. So I kept track of my sessions. And it shocked me. Like I would go through this date planner and it'd just be all day, 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 weeks and months at a time. It was insane.
Yeah.
Do you regret it? Do you regret that time?
Do I regret it? Well, I mean, it definitely didn't help my first marriage.
Right.
I don't know if I regret that necessarily, but you know, it certainly didn't help it. I mean, you know, I made the classic mistake that, you know, most guys in their late 20s and early 30s make. I was, you know, we never had kids. I was completely focused on my career and I never said no to a job. And if that meant I worked till 2 a.m, then I got a hotel room and I stayed in the hotel and I went to work the next day and that was that.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, in the industry that we're all in, that in the 90s, that was just normal, you know, working until
totally.
2 a.m. There were times where I didn't leave the studio for 3 days, like literally slept on the couch, you know, so
just because of workflow. I
yeah.
remember I used to have a lot of political clients as well. And so I worked on that stuff typically at the end of the day because it took them all day to be ready. But you waited for messengers to bring a tape and then send the tape back. And then they would look at, you got to change it again, send the master back to Bob. It's like it was mind boggling.
Yep.
You know?
Just all that time wasted, just
waiting,
waiting,
sitting, you know.
Tons of billing though.
Tons of billing. Yeah, there's no question about that.
Tons of billing.
That part was great, but the workflow was so completely different. Everything was different.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you look at the cumulative time, you know, we used to record voiceover, for instance, onto 1/4-inch tape. Ooh. So, you know, if you know, back in the day, if you were working with somebody that was super particular, you know, a guy like Cliff Freeman or something like that, where, you know, you would do, you know, 100 takes of sets of 3 and he'd be like, it's still not funny, Bobby. It's like, I didn't write the shit. I'm just pressing the button.
Right. Yeah.
But just the cumulative amount of time you spent scrolling through tape.
I can't, and 1/4-inch, I can't even imagine what that was
editing
like.
On, you know, editing on 1/4-inch. You know.
Brutal.
Yeah.
So good. So now you've been at Eastside for a while, right? So we're talking like 1990 to about 2001 for Eastside?
So basically 1990 to 2000, and like I want to say around 99 and 2000 is when the migration downtown in New York City began or was at its peak. I'm not really qualified to say when it began. I don't remember who the first company was to do it, but it was starting to happen. Mackenzie Cutler, V2, all the big names had all started to move downtown. So we were like, you know, we need to have a place downtown. Sound Lounge had just opened. And we're like, you know, if we want to be competitive, we have to have a place downtown. So that was how those guys got me to stay. They built Lower East Side for me. So Lower East Side was the first studio that I was really involved in from the ground up in the design and build of. And I hired Glenn Landrum to be the mixer there with me. And we were just 2 rooms at that point in time. And it was really great. I mean, those were probably some of the best times until they sold the company.
Hmm.
And the venture capital people came in, and it's hard to imagine now, as a business owner myself, how many terrible mistakes in a row someone could make. I'm surprised they actually lasted, frankly, as long as they did.
How long did they
So,
last?
well, in a couple of different forms, a couple of maybe 2.5 years, something like that, maybe 3 years. Because the first part of that was they bought Gordon Media, and they were still involved back when Donna Levis was the CEO and all that stuff. Donna was the person who originally hired me. Donna had a bit of a reputation in the business, but I have nothing but fantastic things to say, because Donna was quite frankly, she was a rabbi for me. She gave me an opportunity that I wasn't going to get, paying me, even though now in retrospect I realize it wasn't so ridiculous. But when I first looked at East Side's offer, I was like, boing. Okay, like, really? So she's like, well, if you're billing what you say you're billing, we feel you're worth this. And I'm like, well, I'm definitely billing what I say I'm billing. So great. So they were involved then, and then those guys exited after they realized there wasn't really like a ton of money to make in this business, and they sold it to the next group that good grief, that he was a horse's ass. He was like a political consultant guy from DC with his dad's money, and his friend Mark Barish, who didn't know shit from Shinola. And these guys, they just ran it into the ground. I mean, ran it into the ground to the point you don't understand. Some of the things that happened are kind of epic. Like, they pissed off, like, at Gordon Media, which was Eastside, Post Perfect, Mix Nuts, and Super Dupe. Now, Super Dupe is the old legacy place that Herb Gordon first opened. Everybody that worked there had worked there for, with the exception of maybe Glenn Navi or a couple of the younger guys. All of the older dudes worked there. They had been there for 20 years. I mean, it was that kind of place. These guys fucked up so bad. Those guys quit en masse. Like, just to purposely screw. They literally quit. If I recall correctly, maybe some happened all at once, but as I recall, I think they planned it so they literally quit. One guy quit every week until they had no mixers.
So
this is how terrible they were. These same guys came to me, so I'm at the end of my contract, and obviously, it's been a rough ride now because it's been all kinds of wacky shit. And they're like, you got to sign a new 3-year contract. I'm like, I'm not signing a contract, period, end of story. I said, I got to see what you guys do, because I've already been in purgatory and I'm not really interested in spending any more time here. Going back and forth. And you got to remember, at this point in time, I'm their top biller. And back in those days, top biller is, 1.3, 1.4 million in business by myself. So I know what I'm bringing to the table. And I even acquiesced a little bit, because I'm usually a pretty reasonable guy. And I'm like, all right, look, I get it that you guys got to have a little stability. I'm willing to do a 1-year deal, but that's it. I'm willing to give you a year in writing, but that's it. And they're like, yeah, no way. So I'm like, okay, cool. So called Mark Polygon over at Photomag and said, hey, how would you, well, actually, Rex Recker was, my friend. I was like, you need to introduce me. And my buddy Tom Goldblatt and I were going to move together. Neither one of us want to stay here. And, we want to talk deals. So we did that separately. At that point in time, it's kind of funny now, the things that had changed in my career, now that I knew what I was truly worth. I remember sitting down with Mark going, I don't even want a salary. Just pay me. I want the absolute max commission percentage that we're going to negotiate, and you pay me that every month at the end of the month on what's been paid. But I don't even need to draw. It's fine. I'm doing fine. I mean, back then it was great. I was single, no kids, yay!
Yeah.
You know, we're billing, making money, everything's beautiful, so it was super easy to be like that. And while at Photomag, I decided, you know what, this is just all a bunch of bullshit. I want to move. I'm tired of New York. I have nothing here. I had just broken up with my girlfriend. It's like I was turning 40, and I was like, well, what am I doing? I need a change. So I had decided to move, and I had set that plan in motion. I had sold my loft and put most of my stuff in storage. I owned a house out here that was an investment that I had a tenant in. I gave them notice. I'm not going to, you can't stay. I'm coming back out. And then the morons ran what was left of whatever they called it back then. You're still, audio engine and whatever they were calling everything else. They just ran it completely into the ground. So they auctioned off in bits and pieces most of the facilities, except for Lower East Side, which they're going to try to sell turnkey, because at that point in time, it's only about 2 years old. And that's how Audio Engine came to be. Basically, myself, Tom, Joe Vagnoni, Brian Wick, we are all at Photomag, and Michael Port, who, I'm not going to say a lot of things about, other than the one very, very strong thing about Michael, and he's heard me say this to his face, Michael had a very good entrepreneurial mind. So he brought us together, and Audio Engine wouldn't have existed without his push, because he understood things about business that none of us knew and how to get it started and all of that kind of stuff. The only problem with Michael that grew in time later is he was a terrible manager and a terrible operations person, and I think I even said to him one day, I said, dude, you need to be in a company. Your company should be called I'm the startup guy or something like that. You come in, you get people off the ground, you charge them a fee, you take some equity, whatever, and then you move away, because day to day is not your thing. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. No. We formed that group basically in secret to try and buy Lower East Side whole. And we did. We ultimately did. It was tricky, but we ultimately did. And it went down to the wire. And because it was a turnkey facility, we were in a position that a lot of startups aren't. We literally did sessions the day after we bought the facility.
Incredible.
Because we had 2 fully up and running rooms, even though, we needed to expand. We needed to, we had 4 mixers in 2 rooms. That wasn't going to work. And then at that point in time, in the beginning, 2002 now, Audio Engine started in August of 2002. I already live here. I'm doing this weird, that's not exact, August of 2002. No, August of, my dates are out of order. So that's August of 2001, sorry, because I moved here in 2002. While I got involved in that, I was already committed to moving here. So we had an agreement that I was going to basically work part-time, and I was going to commute. And I did that for, quite some time. I went back and forth for a long time. And in the beginning, basically from 2001 to 2009, when the economy just completely imploded, everything was fantastic. I mean, honestly, we were turning business away.
Wow.
We were turning business away, which was why we took in 2008, or actually late 2007, we took another floor. We started expanding, planning, permitting, designing to build 2 more rooms because we were that busy. They finished those 2 rooms basically right around the end of 2008. And in 2009, the economy shit the bed.
Yeah,
and
big recession.
We wound up doing the same amount of business we were doing in 4 rooms now in 6 rooms, with the overhead of 6 rooms and 6 mixers and all that stuff. So it was a tough time, and but that's all right. We got through that. But the business changed a lot then. A lot of things changed, and then technology really started to change the game. Took the machine. took the machine room away.
And not to mention, like, all the ad agencies were now building their own in-house studios, which didn't help anybody except the agencies.
Nope.
Well, that building went away.
Well, once again, because the same thing, you needed to run a studio, you need all the business. I've told this little tale all the time. I never worried about, am I going to get a Super Bowl spot? Am I going to do this and that? It's like, I know I'm going to get those jobs. Thank God, I'm well enough respected that I know I'm going to get your important job. The problem is, to keep a business up and running and profitable, you need the not so important jobs either. And those, at that point in time, those were the jobs that were going in-house. It's like, oh, this is just, an animatic for Pampers, and we're going to record a VO and put a music track. We got the kids going to do it. It's like, yeah, the problem is that we needed that business. We needed all of that business. And when that started going away, that was a problem. And then the double threat of technology at that point in time, remember, the machine room alone, just dubbing, laybacks, all that stuff, the machine room alone used to do hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of business. The studios did about $1 million, $1.1 million in business each, and the machine room did a few $100,000 in business just on all of that stuff. Had 2 full-time employees just for the machine room,
if not more.
More. Yeah, at a big place like National, for sure.
Yeah,
we were small. We were really small. We were still kind of a boutique shop. I mean, we were not, even for our contemporary peers at that point in time, we were nowhere near as big as Sound Lounge, nowhere near as big as Soundtrack. We were 4 rooms most of the time, and then 6 only towards the end. And those guys, already had 10 rooms, and they were way bigger than us. But you made a lot of money behind the scenes. And all of that slowly started chipping away. And what you wound up left with, and this is really what changed the complexion of the business completely in every aspect of post, color, editorial, everything. You were left with the least profitable and most complicated part of the job was all you had left to sell. There was no easy money. And when I say easy money, I don't mean that in a cavalier sense that you could be an idiot and just make some money by doing something stupid. It's not that. The easy money, every business needs easy money. If you're a mechanic shop, you need a guy to fix a camshaft, but you could get a C guy, a young kid, to change oil and still make the profit on that service. Well, we lost the oil changes and we're left only with the really complicated jobs. And while that was fine technically for us to do, still rewarding, from a business point of view, it made business much, much trickier.
And then you lost on top of that, the actual producers coming into the studios where that added money of food, messenger, whatever,
car services,
services, right? All of that fringe
all that
stuff
went away.
Carried a markup, and all of that stuff just went by the wayside. And I think personally, one of the problems that affected everybody was clients were used to a certain level of amenities. I mean, post houses had chefs and masseuses. We used to have a masseuse. We used to have a nail technician. We used to have all these stuff. You
had Yankee tickets. You had basketball tickets.
Crazy,
you had concert tickets. You had, that's how you wash their hands for some people. On top of the talent, you had all the underlying stuff that added to that, because after the session, if there was a game going on, you guys would go to the games together.
Sure.
Let the assistant do the backup. Let the assistant do the layoffs. At that point, everything's approved. They would go, and all that went away.
Yeah, and that stuff was all, has helped the margin significantly. So now the margin is cut by a lot, but clients still kind of want the same amenities and things they've been used to. Kind of like a government program. Regardless of what you think about it, I'm not even going to comment. As soon as the government gives you something, it's very, very difficult for them to turn around and go, oh, you know what, we're not going to give you that anymore.
Correct.
Because you get people used to stuff like that. So if you start taking those things away, then you're perceived as, well, it's not as good, or they're losing it, or, whatever. But the truth of the matter was, nobody could do it anymore. And some people, actually, some people read the writing on the wall very, very well, better than certainly we did, I would say. There were a couple of editorial companies that they were like, see you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what Chris and I talk about this all the time. Chris was that, for the years that he worked in an agency and did all the stuff that he did for radio, he did a lot of radio spots. He worked at a lot of studios, and you attended a lot of those studios. Then at some point you weren't attending anymore because of Zoom, because of being patched in. Oh, ISDN.
Well, that's way. Zoom's obviously way.
Yeah.
Zoom
so ISDN. Remember ISDN? ISDN
Sure.
was a hell. That was a money maker in itself.
Yeah, although to be completely fair, I probably shouldn't say this on a public podcast, but to be completely fair, there are a couple of ways technology has helped us in that department. We still charge the same amount of money that we used to charge for a remote connection, but it doesn't cost as much as it used to. ISDN was expensive. I mean, for instance, in Phoenix, nobody has an analog ISDN set up on a POTS line anymore.
I can imagine. I mean, it was expensive. It was expensive.
Yeah,
and it's not crazy expensive, but it's $100 a month just to have the lines. It's $1,200 a year, and I'm doing everything on Source Connect or by one of the IP-based systems. So, I'm going to have ISDN and I held out for a long time. I was the last guy that got rid of it. It's really funny when I called one of my friends here, who's my competitor, but we're very friendly, and I'm like, dude, do you still have ISDN? He's like, oh no, man, I got rid of that like a year ago. I'm like, I'm an idiot, I gotta go.
A side note on that, Bob and I argued about that at one point, because I remember calling you. I go, hey Bob, dump this thing, let's get Source connecting each other. No, we still need it. I was like, no, we don't. And he was the last one to hold out, because
because I'm a big believer in things that work,
of course,
don't necessarily need to be changed. I'm
right.
not one to upgrade to the latest version all the time. As a matter of fact, just prior to the pandemic, I was working on, relatively speaking, quite an old Pro Tools HD rig. I mean, pretty blown up, but still a TDM rig. And the only reason that I did the big upgrades I did during the pandemic was because, in order to bring in Zoom and bring in all of the other things and be able to really work remotely in a communicative way, I couldn't do it on the old OS. So I needed to, upgrade a lot of stuff. But, that's a pain in the ass. If it works, I don't want to deal with it.
No, I'm with you.
I like stability. And one of the things that was amazing about ISDN, it was bulletproof. It always worked, as opposed to the IP-based systems, even though they're a billion times better today than they were when they started. I mean, because technically, to Ray's point, we owned Source Connect when it first came out, but it was not reliable the way it is now.
Correct.
And even now, sometimes it's not reliable. People are just, this is a funny thing. People are just used to it now. So when you're on a Source Connect section and it's not working right, you say, I'm going to drop it and reconnect or whatever. And nobody bats an eye. Just the same way, if your rig goes down, across, go, I got to restart. Nobody even looks up. When I first started working with nonlinear systems, and this is back in the Eastside days, if the screen sound crashed, which it did, people would be like, oh my God, did we lose everything? Like, what? It's like, no, relax. But, their comfort level was way off. They had no idea. They're like, oh my God, the Avid crashed. We lost a day's worth of work. It's like, no, it didn't work like that. Unless you had bad practices. But if you were doing things the way you were supposed to be doing, it wasn't a catastrophe. But the clients just weren't used to it. So they see this and they go, oh, they think that's the worst thing that's ever happened. So we're used to it now. Source Connect's acting up. Okay, we'll connect and reconnect and, whatever, try something different.
Yeah, it'll work itself out.
Yeah, exactly.
So in essence, after that, I mean, now you're losing client. Actually, now you're competing with your own clients at this point for work, right? That's the change that happens, right? Because Now the people that actually depended on you to work, now they have become your competitor.
Yeah, absolutely.
So from that change on, after that, then things started more to change for you, right?
Well, look, for me, I can only speak to my own direct experiences. In 2013, I bought out the partners because we needed to do more than just be in audio. And my mission was successful. We grew the company tremendously, tripled revenues, had had an editorial brand, had a VFX brand, had a music brand, had all this stuff. But the truth of the matter was, even though top line revenue went way up, the margin at the end of the day was pretty much the same for me. Actually, in some ways, it was even a little worse. So I'm like, I got all this on my head and all this risk and, all of this stuff on top of me. And I'm basically still making the same amount of money I was making when we were much smaller. So something's not right. So even though that seemed like the right thing to do, and many people were doing it, I wasn't the only person that did it. It's not like I had some, singular vision of an idea that, nobody else thought about. A lot of people did it. Just the problem was the business was still changing, and having all those brands and having that gigantic payroll and, A Media's payroll at one point in time was, $150, $175 a cycle. It's like, that
hurt. That's tough to handle.
That's a tough nut to crack when you got people that don't pay you for 45, 60 and 90 days.
Right.
So, it just, after a while, it just didn't make any sense to do this. And I just absolutely went in the other direction and just shrunk the company down. And in New York, at least, the biggest problem was I would have been there 20 years in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic. It's when my lease, the second 10-year lease, would have expired. I never expected my lease was going to be renewed. We were paying $28 a foot in a neighborhood where they're getting $75 a foot. It's like, it's never going to happen. And even if my landlord was the nicest guy in the world and said, "Hey, Bob, don't worry about it, we're only going to double the rent," I didn't have that much in the margin. I couldn't have survived that. So I never thought I was going to be able to stay in New York past 2020. The problem is, what was it, Ray, in 2007 or 2008 did they sell them? No, I'm sorry, not 2017 or 2018.
2018.
The building got sold. And man, oh man, did I learn a lesson that I had not learned yet.
Hey everyone, this will conclude the first half of our discussion with Bob. In the next episode, he tells us about that crazy lesson that he learned from his landlord and how the industry continues to evolve and change and how COVID may have changed the business forever. Thanks again for listening. See you on the next Book It or Release podcast with part 2 of Bob Giammarco.